Why did you swap my lube for glue? My voice trembling as I stared at the small bottle on the bathroom counter. These were the words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage, and in exactly 15 minutes, everything in my life would feel upside down. The smell of the cheap lavender soap that my wife always insisted on using mixed with the metallic tang of the glue on my fingers made me gag. I had never felt such a mix of confusion and panic, my hands shaking as I tried open the cap. I remember that I had bought that lubricant 2 months ago at Walgreens on 5th Avenue in Brooklyn, $21.76, exact down to the last cent, a small purchase. But for me, it symbolized nights of tenderness and connection after 35 years of marriage, since our small wedding at St. Patrick's Cathedral in 1989, where we danced to a live band playing oldies from the 70s and 80s. Memories that now seem like they belong to someone else. My wife, Karen, stood there crossing her arms with a smirk like a scene from a movie I never auditioned for, and said with pure disdain, "I thought you needed a change," her voice dripping with condescension, and I felt my chest tighten. Because this was not a joke, this was deliberate and cruel betrayal. In the most intimate of places, I remember the hundreds of hours I had spent renovating our small brownstone on Sullivan Street in Manhattan, painting every wall myself, sanding the hardwood floors till they shone like mirrors, all to create a safe and loving environment where we could grow old together. Now I felt every ounce of that effort being spat on with that single cruel act. The bathroom tiles were cold under my feet, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead like a cruel reminder. Reality. My neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, from across the hall, had come over earlier that morning to borrow sugar, and she had peeked into the bathroom. For a second, she had seen nothing but my panic, but later I would find out she had called her granddaughter to warn her about my plight. I remember the exact time, 7:42 a.m., the sun barely peeking through the dusty blinds, casting stripes across the sink, where I now held the glue-covered bottle, shaking uncontrollably. The sound of the toothpaste tube being squeezed on the counter seemed to echo like a drum in my head. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them comforting. I thought about the last time I had trusted her, when I bought the bottle at Rite Aid on 125th Street, Harlem, a week before our anniversary, and had hidden it in the drawer because I wanted it to be a surprise for the weekend. I had meticulously planned candles from Yankee Candle Store, $45.99 each, to set mahogany teakwood, a nostalgic nod to the 80s when we first met. And the candles were supposed to line the bathtub, where I imagine us laughing, remembering the first concert we went to in Central Park, 1978, a Peter Frampton show, where we danced in the mud with thousands of screaming fans. I remembered every detail of that night, the smell of rain and wet grass, the sound of Frampton's guitar echoing, and now the glue on my fingers felt like a metaphor for the mess my life had suddenly become. "Are you serious?" I whispered to her, not wanting to raise my voice, but unable to hide the quiver of my words, barely audible over the humming of the bathroom vent. "I thought you said you loved me," I added, hoping for a hint of remorse. But Karen just tilted her head and smiled. That infuriating, self-satisfied smile I felt my face flush red with humiliation that no amount of years of marriage could protect me from. I remembered every sacrifice I had made, the late nights at the office in Lower Manhattan, earning $87,432.15 to fund our small vacation home in the Catskills. A dozen of times I had driven 90 miles each way just to pick up groceries. She liked the exact brand of cereal or toothpaste, even when I was exhausted. The nights I spent sewing patches on her old denim jacket from 1975 because she refused to buy a new one. All these details flashing like a cruel slideshow in my mind. Now I felt powerless, but I knew that in 15 minutes everything could change, and I would either crumble or find a way to rise. The sound of the glue bottle clicking echoed louder than any alarm clock, my hands trembling over the sink, the smell of the lavender soap blended with the glue's chemical stench, making me dizzy. I thought about calling my brother Steve in Queens, but my pride stopped me. I remember the exact words he had said last Thanksgiving at our family dinner in Flushing. "You've always been a rock, Wilson. Don't let anyone break you." Those words now felt like a prophecy. I had to act. I looked at Karen. She was scrolling her phone, oblivious to the storm I felt building inside me, and I whispered under my breath, a plan forming like the intricate gears of a clock ticking down to an inevitable confrontation. "In exactly 15 minutes, you will see that I am not helpless," I murmured, and she glanced up, raising an eyebrow. Expecting fear, instead, she found a quiet determination that she had never seen before the sunlight fell on her face, highlighting her smirk and the irony of the situation. The smell of the coffee brewing downstairs wafted to the vent, rich and dark, promising comfort. But the tension in the bathroom was suffocating. I remember the first time we danced together at a small community hall. In Yonkers, her purple dress shimmering in the disco lights, the smell of hairspray and sweat mixing into a memory I cherished, and now that memory fueled my resolve that I would not let a cruel act define the rest of my life. I held the glue bottle tighter, thinking about the neighbors peeking through the blinds, the bus driver on 7th Avenue, who waved at me every morning, the mailman, who always left a note for Karen. Little did they know that today they would witness a transformation from humiliation to empowerment. I knew I had 15 minutes, and I would make every second count, the bathroom mirror reflected. My worried face lined with age, but eyes sharp and calculated, my hands steadied, as I formulated the first move in a chain reaction that would flip the entire script on Karen and make her regret underestimating me. I whispered again, "You have no idea what's coming." And the glue bottle slipped slightly, but I caught it. I looked at the time, 7:57 a.m., 30 seconds left of the moment, when everything would pivot. The sound of a neighbor's dog barking echoed down the street, a reminder of life. Continuing outside, my private held my heart pounded like the old drum set I used to play in a high school band in White Plains, the one Karen hated, because it was loud, but full of joy. I closed my eyes briefly, inhaling the lavender and the chemical tang together, committing the memory of this surreal moment to my mind, knowing that in exactly 15 minutes, nothing would ever be the same. The stage was set, and the first act of a long awaited justice was about to unfold. If you ever felt powerless in the face of betrayal, if you ever had someone undermine your efforts and laugh in your face, comment below. And let me know if you've ever felt the sting of being blindsided, because what happened next would shock everyone in ways I could never have imagined. I never thought a simple bottle of lube could expose everything I had built over decades. My name is Wilson, and at 57 years old, I had spent the last 35 years of my life pouring everything into my marriage and my home, every sacrifice meticulously planned, every dollar accounted for, and now all of it seemed to hang by a thread. I remember the exact moment I bought that bottle of lubricant at Walgreens, 5th Avenue. Brooklyn, it was March 14th, 2025, at precisely 3:17 p.m. I had taken my time comparing brands. The one I chose, $21.76, a small sum. But for me, it represented effort and thoughtfulness. Every small purchase had meaning, like the $87,432.15 I had saved over 3 years to renovate our brownstone on Sullivan Street, Manhattan. The hardwood floors sanded and polished by my own hands, the walls painted a soft beige that Karen insisted made the living room feel warmer. I had spent 236 hours over 6 months restoring the old fireplace in the living room, imagining her surprise when she first saw it glowing with fire on a winter night. And every Friday morning for the past 20 years, I would wake at exactly 6:15 a.m. to brew fresh coffee, smelling the dark roasted beans from Pete's Coffee in Chelsea, the aroma filling the kitchen, while she slept in a soft lavender robe, the steam curling around her shoulders. It was these small acts of devotion that defined my life. My dedication extended beyond material gestures. I remembered the countless nights I stayed late at the office in Lower Manhattan, finishing reports on timesheets and budgets to ensure we could take that small vacation in the Catskills, a rental cabin on Cedar Street. Pine Hill, New York cost $1,452.90 for a weekend, but it was worth every penny for the look in her eyes when we arrived, the smell of pine and fresh rain mingling with her laughter echoing off the cabin walls. These were memories I thought were secure until the glue incident shattered that illusion. I had also taken care to maintain her health. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I would drive exactly 92 miles round trip to Midtown Manhattan to pick up her prescription medication. The $312.47 monthly cost seemed trivial compared to the peace of mind it brought knowing she was cared for. I remember the first time she noticed the attention to detail the scarf I bought for her 45th birthday at Bloomingdale's, exact price $89.99, a cashmere blend from Italy, the rich burgundy color matching her eyes the moment she unwrapped it in our small living room. Overlooking the East River was etched into my memory her smile and the faint scent of her Chanel No. 5 perfume mingling with the aroma of roasted turkey from the oven, the anticipation of her laughter at the surprise dinner with our friends from Yonkers and White Plains still vivid. Every act of generosity I had performed over decades had created expectations, legitimate expectations, that I would be treated with the same respect and consideration. I remember the subtle signs of disrespect over the years, the way she would sigh when I offered to help clean the garage on a Sunday morning at exactly 9:03 a.m., the clock on the wall ticking. As I lifted boxes of old vinyl records, each one carefully cataloged since my college days at NYU, the smell of dust and paper cutting through the air, the faint sound of a neighbor's lawnmower outside, nothing major, but cumulative the tiny eroding moments building like waves against a cliff, until the glue incident became the storm that broke the edge. I remember my early mornings at Grand Central Station, taking the 7:45 a.m. train to work in Long Island City, feeling the cold metal of the subway handrails under my palms, the smell of hot pretzels from the vendor, and the sound of the whistle signaling the next train. As I thought about how I had juggled my professional responsibilities, to ensure Karen never wanted for anything, my generosity was not limited to finances. I had spent thousands of hours listening to her stories recounting the 1978 concert in Central Park, Peter Frampton, the smell of damp grass mixing with music and laughter, and I had danced with her in our small apartment living room, pretending to be in our 20s again, the clock ticking over the years, my dedication measurable in every gesture, the careful calculation of time and money, even the trips to Queens to see my brother Steve, where I carried with me exactly 3 bottles of her favorite lotion, $4.99 each, to remind her that I thought of her even when miles away. I remember the anticipation of our wedding anniversary each September 12th, the dinner reservations at lube, Bernardine, Manhattan, $682.54, including tipped a bouquet of fresh tulips from Chelsea Market, $47.25, every detail chosen with precision and love. And yet, after all this investment, the humiliation I faced in the bathroom that morning with the glue bottle exposed me to a reality I had never imagined. The countless acts of devotion, the sensory memories, the numbers, the exact dates and times, all seemed irrelevant against the cruelty of one calculated moment. And as I held that bottle, feeling the chemical stench mixed with the lavender soap, I realized that everything I had invested emotionally, financially, and physically had brought me to this pivotal moment that would demand response that was measured, calculated, and inevitable. And if you have ever spent decades building something only to have it undermined by someone you trusted, wait until you see what happens next. The escalation of humiliation would test everything I thought I knew about loyalty and respect, and the next chapter would reveal just how far someone could push a person before the breaking point was reached. By 8:15 a.m., I had already endured 3 separate waves of humiliation. My hands, still coated with the glue, I had tried desperately to wash off the sticky residue clinging to my skin, as if mocking my decades of devotion. I remember the first wave when I attempted to speak to Karen calmly. "This isn't funny, Karen," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger, and she laughed a short, sharp laugh that cut to the tension like a knife and said, "Oh, come on, Wilson, lighten up. It's just a joke," her words dripping with condescension. And I felt my chest tighten, remembering every sacrifice, every renovation, every carefully planned anniversary, and how it all felt worthless in that one laugh. The second wave came when I tried to leave the bathroom to find the neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, peeking to the doorway with her phone raised, filming the entire scene. She whispered, "Oh my God, Wilson, what is happening?" And I could feel her eyes judging me through the lens like millions of invisible onlookers. My humiliation compounded by the presence of witnesses, and the faint sound of her granddaughter giggling in the background made my stomach churn. The third wave arrived when Karen began to openly mock me in front of our friends who had dropped by unexpectedly at 8:37 a.m. Bob and Linda from Yonkers stood frozen in disbelief, their eyes wide, as she waved her phone at them filming. "Look at him struggling with his precious little bottle," she said with a smirk. I told him a change was needed, and I felt the burn of embarrassment spread across my face. The smell of the glue mixed with the lingering aroma of my fresh coffee from earlier, creating a nauseating cocktail in the small kitchen, where the confrontation escalated. Every attempt I made to diffuse the situation was met with increasing arrogance on her part. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" she snapped at 8:42 a.m., exact time recorded on my watch, the buzzing of the refrigerator echoing in the background. My attempts to reason with her were futile. I remembered clearly how I had tried to appeal to our history. Remember when we danced at that small hall in Yonkers, 1978, Peter Frampton playing live The Smell of Rain, and wet grass, the music echoing in our hearts. And she crossed her arms, rolling her eyes, and said, "That was decades ago, Wilson, get over it." Her dismissal slicing through years of shared memories like they never mattered, and I felt the line of tolerance snap, inside me the first witness to react beyond. Mere observation was our mailman, Mr. Jenkins, who happened to arrive at exactly 8:45 a.m., delivering letters. He stopped in the doorway, staring wide-eyed. "Is everything okay here?" And Karen smirked at him as if performing a scene. "Oh, don't worry. He just can't handle a little surprise." The public nature of the humiliation intensified the shame. The sound of the mail sliding onto the counter mingled with the buzzing of the glue bottle cap, still clutched in my hands, and I realized that no amount of polite reasoning could reverse the tide. The neighbors across the street from our brownstone on Sullivan Street had begun peeking through the blinds and whispering to each other, the faint sound of their chatter traveling down the hall. And the street below, as I tried to maintain composure, every detail of the environment amplified my embarrassment. The smell of the old wooden floor beneath my feet, the faint scent of Mrs. Thompson's lavender soap wafting in from the hallway, and the sticky sensation of glue on my palms, all combining into a surreal cocktail of shame and anger. I remember my attempts to intervene diplomatically at 8:50 a.m., speaking directly to Karen. "Please, we can talk about this privately." And she shook her head, smirking. "No, Wilson, this is for everyone to see. Maybe you need a lesson." The words hit harder than any physical blow. The escalation continued when she invited our friend Mark from White Plains, who arrived at 8:53 a.m., to witness the scene. She handed him the glue bottle, saying, "Look at what he bought. I thought he might need a change." Mark froze, caught between disbelief and awkwardness, and I realized that the humiliation was no longer private. It had become performance orchestrated to maximize my discomfort. Every laugh, every smirk recorded on multiple phones now threatened to exist forever on social media. The crescendo of my indignation came precisely at 8:57 a.m., when Karen decided to make a public spectacle of the glue on my hands. She waved them under the fluorescent bathroom light, saying, "Look at him struggling. Can someone help him?" And a small crowd of neighbors who had gathered outside the building began filming their own videos. I felt the sting of eyes judging me through glass windows and digital screens. The buzzing of a car alarm from the street below punctuated the moment, and the warm smell of coffee from a neighbor's open kitchen window mixed with the chemical sting of the glue, creating a sensory overload that made my skin crawl. I realized that the line had been crossed not in inches or feet, but in every small act of calculated cruelty. Over the years, culminating in this public spectacle, I had tried negotiation, patience, and understanding, but now nothing would suffice. The arrogance of Karen and her deliberate attempts to humiliate me had ignited a quiet storm of determination inside me that would not be contained any longer. And as I looked around the crowded bathroom, the smirks, the cameras, the whispers of witnesses, my mind finally settled on a single undeniable truth: that I would not be a victim forever. The escalation of humiliation had served its purpose. It had exposed the limits of tolerance, and now I was ready to cross the threshold of action. A line was drawn. The time marked 9 a.m., and what happened next would begin the pivotal shift from powerless to empower. The audience must wait until the next chapter to witness how a man who had been publicly humiliated took the first step toward reclaiming dignity and asserting justice. If you have ever been mocked, laughed at, or publicly humiliated, comment below and tell me how you felt, because what comes next will challenge every expectation. At exactly 9:02 a.m., I felt a strange calm settle over me. The chaos of glue and humiliation still around me, the whispers of neighbors, the smirks of witnesses, Karen scrolling her phone, oblivious to the storm that had begun inside me. Yet for the first time, I was not panicking. I was thinking with clarity. As I stood there, hands sticky and heart pounding, I remembered every lesson life had taught me, every sacrifice and every calculation that had brought me here. For decades, I had quietly built resources, knowledge, and influence that Karen assumed I had no access to. She had underestimated the depth of my resolve and the extent of my preparation. The first sign of awakening came when I looked at the wall clock, 9:03 a.m., the fluorescent light reflecting off the beige tiles like a spotlight illuminated my resolve. I recalled the bank statements tucked into the safe in the bedroom, the $102,347.88 accumulated over the past 3 years from investments in small businesses in Queens, the deeds to the small vacation cabin in Pine Hill where I had meticulously logged every repair and renovation, costing exactly $12,489.56, and the legal papers proving joint ownership in a Manhattan brownstone, everything quietly stored away. While Karen assumed her power was absolute, I inhaled the mixture of lavender soap and glue chemicals and felt a strange sense of purpose. Crystallized inside me, I realized in the past I had reacted emotionally to every insult, every slight, every act of arrogance. Now I would act strategically and deliberately. The second sign came when I remembered the silent alarm installed in the brownstone on Sullivan Street that I had set up after a burglary scare in 2019. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the alarm could send video feeds directly to my phone, and I knew that every witness watching through blinds and doors outside could now be documented for later use, every gesture, every smirk. Every act of public humiliation recorded. As evidence of deliberate cruelty, I felt my fingers tightened around the glue bottle, not in fear, but in readiness of the plan. Forming in my mind, the third sign appeared when I considered the people who had come into my life over the years, quietly observing and recording without care, and noticing my old friend from White Plains who worked as a local journalist's camera, always ready, my brother Steve, who had warned me repeatedly, "Wilson, you have more power than you think." Those lessons repeated in my mind. At exactly 9:05 a.m., I realized I could turn this public humiliation into a calculated revelation of truth. I remembered the documents hidden in the filing cabinet behind the kitchen door, every legal document proving assets ownership, and evidence of her attempts to manipulate me. Over the years, the small details she thought were private would now become instruments of transformation. I took a deep breath to smell a glue, chemical tang, and faint lavender, sharp contrast that focused my mind, and whispered to myself, "No longer will I be powerless." I glanced at Karen. She was laughing at a video on her phone, completely unaware that her assumption of control was about to be shattered. The neighbors outside, still filming, thinking they were watching a spectacle of weakness, would soon witness a reversal of fortune. And at 9:07 a.m., I moved silently to retrieve my phone from the counter, my hands still sticky, but my mind clear. I dialed my friend Mark in White Plains, the one who had always respected my careful discretion. I whispered under my breath, "Everything you've seen today, document it, and wait for my signal." His voice came back steady and calm. "Understood, Wilson." And in that moment, I felt the first pulse of power surge through me. I realized that for years I had been underestimated, not because I lacked strength, but because I concealed it carefully like a coiled spring ready to uncoil when necessary. The final sign of the turning point came when I remembered my decades of networking in Manhattan's legal circles, the precise names of attorneys and accountants I had consulted quietly over the years, the subtle alliances formed at PDA meetings in Yonkers, the community board in White Plains, every relationship built with care, now ready to tip the scales in my favor. I could see it clearly now. The calm before the storm was no accident. It was my opportunity to prepare and act strategically, to reclaim dignity and assert justice, not for revenge, but for the undeniable truth that long-term investment in relationships, effort, and integrity must be respected, and any attempt to belittle or humiliate will be met with consequence. At 9:10 a.m., I smiled, quietly knowing that Karen had just underestimated the wrong man, and that in the coming minutes the power dynamic would shift irrevocably. And if you have ever felt underestimated or dismissed, comment below and share your experience, because what happens next will reveal how a carefully calculated response can turn humiliation into empowerment and set the stage for a revelation that no one will forget. At exactly 9:12 a.m., the first move of my plan unfolded. I had silently sent the video feeds from the silent alarm to Mark in White Plains, and within seconds I could see live footage of Karen's smirks and the neighbors' reactions being transmitted directly to my laptop in the study. The smell of glue still lingering on my fingers, the faint aroma of coffee from the kitchen below mixing with the lavender soap, I felt a surge of calculated control that was almost intoxicating. I remembered the files hidden in the filing cabinet, the deeds, the bank statements, the legal documents proving my joint ownership of the Manhattan brownstone, and the Pine Hill cabin, every detail meticulously recorded over years of careful planning. I had always known that Karen assumed her power was absolute. She never imagined that I had quietly amassed evidence of her manipulations and arrogance over the years. At 9:15 a.m., I opened the laptop and displayed the live feed on the screen in the kitchen where Karen and our friends could see it, every video time-stamped and cataloged, every angle showing her smirks and mockery in real time. Mark's voice came over the speaker. Everyone watching will now see the complete picture, and Karen froze, her phone slipping from her hands. She could not comprehend what was unfolding. Her smirk vanished, replaced by confusion, fear, and disbelief. I whispered calmly under my breath, Karen, what you underestimated was my ability to turn this humiliation into undeniable truth. The neighbors outside pressed their phones to their faces, capturing their own footage, as I revealed the documents proving ownership of assets and investments she had assumed were secret. The contrast between my calm, controlled demeanor and her panic was palpable. The smell of ink from the printed documents, mixing with the chemical sting of glue on my fingers, created a sensory memory that would be unforgettable. I began to narrate the timeline slowly and deliberately, every detail. From March 14th, the $21.76 purchase of the lubricant, the $87,432.15 renovations of the brownstone, every trip to Queens and White Plains, the anniversary dinners at Le Bernardin, $682.54. Every act of devotion cataloged as evidence, and the witnesses could no longer ignore the truth. At 9:20 a.m., Bob and Linda from Yonkers whispered to each other, their faces pale with astonishment. Mark nodded, confirming timestamps and evidence. Everything is verifiable, he said. Clearly the shift in power was immediate. Karen's arrogance dissolved. She stammered, I didn't realize. And I interrupted calmly. You never realized because you assumed ignorance and weakness, but everything you underestimated has now been revealed. The neighbors outside began whispering to each other, their astonishment audible as they realized the extent of my preparation. Even Mrs. Thompson across the hall gasped, covering her mouth. I can't believe it. And the live feed showed her reaction, confirming the universal shock everyone present witnessed. A plot twist unfolding. The dynamic of power had shifted completely from humiliation to undeniable authority. The once smug and condescending Karen was now confronted with evidence she could not deny. Her eyes darted from document to document, the timestamps on videos, to Mark's nod confirming everything she had done had been recorded. The magnitude of her error hit her like a wave. At 9:25 a.m. I began to outline the implications of documents showing joint ownership, legal rights, and financial assets that she had tried to manipulate presented an undeniable shift in control. She had assumed temporary power based on ignorance. Now she faced the consequence of long-term preparation and careful calculation. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sticky sensation of glue on my fingers, a stark reminder of the moment that had triggered this transformation. Karen's whisper, Wilson, I didn't think you would, was cut off as I calmly said, what you did today underestimated my patience, my preparation, and my power. And now everyone here sees the truth. Every neighbor, every friend, every witness present felt the shock of the reversal of fortune. At 9:30 a.m., I revealed the final piece, the legal documents proving that any future attempts at public humiliation or manipulation would have tangible consequences. Financial and social reactions were visceral. The disbelief on Karen's face, the astonishment of Bob and Linda, the awe from neighbors, and even the subtle pride in Mark's expression confirmed the complete revelation of power. The atmosphere shifted palpably, the once tense room filled with quiet respect and realization that I was not just a victim, but a man who had transformed humiliation into undeniable authority. The chemical smell of glue and lavender still lingering reminded everyone that the smallest acts can catalyze monumental shifts. If you have ever been underestimated or dismissed or faced someone arrogantly assuming power, share your thoughts in the comments and witness how strategic patience and careful preparation can turn humiliation into empowerment. And if this revelation shocked you as much as it did me, share this with someone who needs to see the truth, because what follows in the next chapter are the immediate consequences that reinforce justice in real time. By 9:32 a.m., the momentum I had carefully orchestrated shifted into tangible consequences. Karen's panic had become visible to everyone in the room and outside. The neighbors on Sullivan Street and the streets below were murmuring in awe at the display of authority and control. I calmly laid out the next steps, every detail precise and deliberate. I called our attorney Linda from White Plains at exactly 9:34 a.m., explaining the entire situation. The live video feed from the silent alarm and Mark's documentation provided incontrovertible proof of her deliberate humiliation and public mockery. By 9:36 a.m., Linda confirmed that immediate legal action could be taken to secure my rights and prevent further abuse. The room felt electric with tension and anticipation. The smell of glue still clinging to my fingers, a tactile reminder of the ordeal, combined with a faint aroma of brewed coffee wafting from the kitchen below, heightened the sensory gravity of the moment. Karen tried to speak at 9:37 a.m. Wilson, I But I raised my hand calmly and said, "Please, Karen, let the facts speak for themselves." The first punishment was immediate. The live feed had already alerted our neighbors and friends about the situation, and within minutes several neighbors, including Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Jenkins, came forward offering statements confirming her mockery and public humiliation. At 9:40 a.m., Karen realized that her temporary arrogance had exposed her to social accountability. The whispers outside grew. Louder, the onlookers recording their own footage now became witnesses, reinforcing my position. The second consequence came when I activated the prearranged account freezes and notifications on joint assets. Exactly $12,489.56 from the Pine Hill Cabin Renovation Fund was temporarily secured as per our legal arrangement at 9:42 a.m., reinforcing that any future attempts at manipulation or humiliation would have direct financial consequences. The third immediate result was social reinforcement. My friends Bob and Linda from Yonkers and Mark confirmed publicly in front of Karen and the neighbors that the evidence was factual and verifiable. Her smirk vanished, entirely replaced with the recognition of her miscalculation. The dynamic of power had shifted visibly. The smell of ink from the printed documents and the chemical tang of glue became markers of justice. Served, every witness present nodded in subtle acknowledgement of the shift. At 9:45 a.m., the culmination of these actions was clear. Karen's previous control evaporated. She was now aware that her attempt at domination had consequences that were immediate and irreversible. I calmly walked to the center of the room, feeling the sticky glue under my fingertips as a symbol of my resilience, and whispered, "This is the cost of underestimating someone you've tried to humiliate." The fourth consequence manifested through community acknowledgement. The neighbors outside began recording supportive videos documenting my strategic response and sharing them within local community groups. By 9:50 a.m., it was evident that public perception had fully reversed. The once powerful Karen was now recognized as the one who had overstepped while I had maintained dignity and authority. The fifth outcome occurred when I contacted a mediator at exactly 9:53 a.m., arranging for a session to formalize boundaries and reinforce respect, ensuring that any further interactions would be governed by clear rules. The combination of legal, social, and personal measures created an immediate and multi-layered justice system. The hum of the refrigerator and the occasional bark from the street below punctuated the proceedings like drum beats, marking the fall of arrogance and rise of accountability. The sixth result was psychological. Her demeanor transformed from smirking superiority to anxious compliance. At 9:57 a.m., she approached me cautiously, saying, "I didn't mean to," and I interrupted softly yet firmly, "Your actions spoke louder than words, Karen, and now the consequences are clear." The witnesses nodded in agreement, understanding that my measured response was both powerful and fair. The final immediate consequence was systemic recognition. The neighborhood buzzed with the story of a man who had been publicly humiliated yet had used strategy, patience, and preparation to assert justice in real time, creating a ripple effect of respect for dignity, accountability, and careful planning every sensory detail. The lingering glue, the smell of coffee and soap, the sound of whispers outside reinforce the magnitude of the reversal. If you have ever witnessed injustice or felt powerless in a public situation, comment below and share your experience, because what unfolded here proves that strategic action and calm authority can transform humiliation into immediate and undeniable justice. And in the next chapter, you will see the transformation and reflection that turns this ordeal into a lifelong lesson and inspiration for everyone. By 10 a.m., I stood in the center of the kitchen, hands still slightly sticky from the glue. The room silent, except the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car horn from Sullivan Street below. The magnitude of what had just occurred began to sink in. Karen's previous arrogance replaced with cautious respect. The neighbors and friends who had witnessed the events now looked at me with a mixture of awe and understanding. And for the first time since the morning began, I felt a deep sense of closure. The first lesson was personal empowerment. I had spent decades quietly building resources, knowledge, and influence that Karen assumed I lacked, and today every hidden preparation came to fruition, proving that patience, strategy, and integrity could turn humiliation into empowerment. I thought about the countless mornings waking at 6:15 a.m. to brew coffee from Pete's in Chelsea, the aroma filling our brownstone. The 236 hours, sanding hardwood floors, the $87,432.15 invested in Renovations, every trip to Queens and White Plains to ensure Karen's happiness, every meticulously documented financial and legal arrangement, all of it culminating in a moment that transformed public humiliation into undeniable authority. The second lesson was the importance of visibility documentation. And truth to live feeds from the silent alarm march recordings and the careful cataloging of legal documents ensured that the reality of the situation could not be disputed and the power dynamic that Karen assumed was absolute was irrevocably reversed. The third lesson was community and witness, support the neighbors who had watched from blinds, and doors to friends who had arrived unexpectedly, all played a role in amplifying the impact of justice. The social reinforcement was as important as the legal measures and created a ripple of accountability that extended beyond immediate confrontation. The fourth lesson was resilience and emotional control. I had felt the humiliation, the panic, and the absurdity of the glue on my fingers, yet I had remained calm, focused, and strategic. And that composure allowed me to turn what seemed like a disaster into an opportunity for empowerment, transformation, and long-lasting respect. The fifth lesson was universal injustice can touch anyone regardless of age, experience, or social status, yet the way we respond with strategy, dignity, and preparation determines the outcome. The neighborhood would talk about this moment for weeks, and even years. The smell of coffee, the lingering chemical tang of glue, the soft lavender soap, the hum of the refrigerator, and the whispers of neighbors would all become part of memory of justice and empowerment that anyone witnessing could learn from. I looked at Karen calmly and said, "What happened today proves that underestimation can be costly, but preparation, patience, and integrity always prevail." The expressions on her face changed from anxiety to acknowledgement. She nodded quietly, understanding that the lesson had been delivered and received. The final reflection was deeply personal and communal. I had turned vulnerability into strength, humiliation into authority, and despair into clarity. The sticky glue on my fingers would fade, but the memory of empowerment would remain as a blueprint for dealing with injustice. For anyone who has ever felt powerless or dismissed, comment below and share your story. Engage with this message of resilience. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell to receive updates on similar transformative experiences, and share this story with someone who needs to understand the power of patience, preparation, and strategic action. And as I walked to the living room, the sunlight falling on the beige walls of our Manhattan brownstone, highlighting the details of decades of care and devotion, I felt a sense of permanence in this transformation, a moment when humiliation became empowerment, when chaos became order, and when injustice became a lesson for life. And remember, in every situation where you feel underestimated, overlooked, or humiliated, your preparation, patience, and integrity are your greatest allies. And never forget that even the smallest act of care or planning can create a transformation so profound that everyone witnessing will recognize that the power was never lost. It was simply waiting to be revealed.